Hello, hello, and welcome again. We're getting going on this month's version of the Regulated Research Community of Practice, and I suppose I'll hand it over to Eric to get us going.
Yep, I am today's Masters of Ceremonies, and our first speakers are Irene Kopaljani and Kurt Hillegas from the University of Princeton. And they will talk about convenience versus security, which of course is a very interesting topic to all of us. Please go ahead.
Thank you.
Eric, there was still more. There was one more slide.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's true. Actually, that's true. Our tradition is to, so you gotta hold your horses. The upcoming activities is we have the Cybersecurity Summit next week, and Anurag will be there presenting. And then we also have the EDUCAUSE conference from the 25th to the 28th, which is the week after that, with some very interesting topics that you may be interested in. And then our next monthly webinar is going to be November the 9th, the week before supercomputing. And we will have one presentation confirmed by Tammy McLeod from University of Central Florida on regulated research administration, implications and impact. And then the second presentation, we're still waiting on final confirmation. So and with that, you know what's coming up. And now our speakers, Irene and Kurt, please go ahead.
Hi, everybody. I'll introduce myself. I'm Kurt Hillegas. I'm the Associate CIO for Research Computing at Princeton, and I'm both in our Office of Information Technology and also in our Princeton Institute for Computational Science and Engineering. And I'll let Irene introduce herself.
I'm Irene Kopaljani. I'm a cloud architect in research computing, and I helped stand up secured research infrastructure Citadel at Princeton.
Irene is so humble. She set up. She didn't help. She did the bulk of the work. So looking at what this group, I don't think that we really need to do the introduction, but we've all seen the use of restricted data in research proliferate. Number of projects, types of data we're getting, the scales of data that we're getting. It's restricted data is just becoming more important in the academic research environment. It includes personally identifiable information, things that are HIPAA and FISMA that need to adhere to HIPAA and FISMA regulations. We have CUI is kind of the big driver for a lot of us trying to figure out how to deal with this new regulation that's coming. And then there are things that come with just intellectual property. And what we're finding is that, what we found is that things aren't always consistent. Sometimes we get researchers who are being asked to sign agreements that seem fairly unique. And there are a lot of reasons that we want to protect this data. Number one is we want to avoid being in the headlines of the New York Times or your favorite newspaper. There's cyber attacks happening all the time. We tend to have more open networks than most corporations do. And so we want to be sure that we're protecting our data, protecting the reputations of our institutions, and maintaining the competitiveness of our researchers to get funding and to publish their work. So what we've seen in the past is people would come to us with one-off projects and say, we have this data we have to secure. This is the agreement we've signed. It has to adhere to this agreement. And as the number of projects grew, we were building these little kind of island environments. But as the number of projects grew, it became totally unsustainable to do that. And also, we wanted to adhere more to set protocols rather than kind of doing a one-off for each thing. So as we looked at this kind of non-scalable approach, we thought, what can we do to come up with something different? And so I'll hand it over to Irene to tell you about what she's worked with the rest of the university community to implement.
Thank you, Kurt. So putting the custom solution aside, we had to figure out a solution that would be both scalable and be able to handle data sets that could grow, sometimes exponentially, as well as computational requirements to provide safe environment to conduct the research. At security being a cornerstone of the system, we've automated as much as possible of audit trails, monitoring and alerting of our submins, feeding this data into ISO office for centralized monitoring. And then we finally culminated all of our controls that we have implemented with a third-party assessment. Most importantly, though, we wanted to build something that would be easy to use for researchers and not be too restrictive where it would prohibit them from accomplishing their work. Currently, Citadel is the name of our system. It comprises of the hardware. The software that runs is Tcrypt. It was developed by University of Florida Terra Insights team. We also have integrated policies, procedures, and processes, as well as training. So Citadel, as it stands now, is NIST 800-171 COI, NIST 853 FISMA, and HIPAA compliant environment. It can be used to prevent unauthorized access. We also prevent the distribution of data such as controlled and classified information, EPHI, intellectual property, or export control data. Because the data is fully encrypted with user-owned public-private keys, it is not accessible by system administrators or any other users, as commonly is the case. Only those people with explicit access to the keys can decrypt the data. Next, Kurt will speak about how we've implemented segregation of duties and user roles. You're muted.
I coughed and I muted myself to do that. So what we've done is we've tried to put sufficient governance around around Citadel to make sure that it's meeting the university's needs and has buy-in and control from the broad university community. So another really important thing was making sure that we had segregation of controls and duties across Citadel to make sure that people, we didn't have to make sure that the sysadmins were signing on to every agreement. The sysadmins don't have any access to the data, but Irene will talk about that in a little bit. But the first thing we did is we developed a Citadel steering committee, and it's comprised of people from across the university. So our Office of Research Projects Administration, our Research Integrity and Assurance area, that someone from the IRB is on the Citadel Steering Committee, as well as people from academic departments. And the role of this group is to review project tenancy applications, to make sure that our procedures are up to date and appropriate. And occasionally we audit the results and growth of the system, basically control how the budget is spent, growing the system to meet the needs of the community. A second group that we set up is our escrow group. And so humans never lose things, of course, but in case they do, in case one of the researchers loses the keys, or in case a researcher suddenly leaves the university and we don't have contact with or a way to recover the keys from that researcher, we have a group of escrow individuals who can get together, and by bringing together 3 separate keys, they can then recover the key from the individual who's left the university. So we have 3 groups of 3 people, and those people are from diverse areas across the university, so that we're not there again putting individual control into one group or into kind of a bunch of friends who could gang up and kind of get some data out that that shouldn't come out. And in order to recover a key, the 3 group members have to get together and they each have to put in their key, which then can be used to restore a copy of the lost user's key, which can then be provided to either the user who's lost it or to the PI whose researcher has left the university. With that, I'll hand off to Irene to talk a little bit about how some of the more technical aspects and kind of the hands-on people are having
Thanks, Kurt.
separation of duties.
Thank you. So the other 3 roles that we have in the system are technical and day-to-day roles within it. Administrators, we have designed the system with the thought of having 3 cross-trained administrators. We usually use one person and then after a while they switch, and then we use a rotation so that they stay trained and up to date. Administrators perform monthly system maintenance that includes hardware updates, kernel updates, operating system, and tcrypt software patching. They do not have any access to the research environment or the data, as Kurt stated earlier. Also, as part of our implementation, we introduced a concept of sub-admins. Those are the people that are embedded in a research project to bring control of the project data and user administration closer to researchers. They're responsible for access control and they're served as data sentinels. They truly decide what data can be exported from the system and by whom. Finally, users of the system are onboarded into Citadel by the sub-admins after they complete mandatory training and sign rules of behavior, and after they are being approved by the PI. They are the researchers and students allowed to work on the data. And we have created a fully automated system in ServiceNow that goes through this approval process. Okay, so the little snippet of workflows that you see on your screen is a workflow that controls administrative component of Citadel. We have automated tenancy application process, environment resizing process, user requests to be added and removed. Everything goes through ServiceNow and it's fully automated. The system reminds steering committee members to cast their votes, and then if votes are not cast in time, it goes back and reminds them a second time, after which if the decision is not met, it triggers the process owner to schedule a meeting during which the decision will be reached. Kurt, over to you.
So the title of the talk was about convenience. So we've talked a lot about controls, and controls can be barriers and hurdles that the researchers have to go through. So we want to make sure that we're making an environment for research projects classified at level 4 in our university data classification system, so that people can securely and comply with the requirements of their data. But we want to do this in a way that it's only for projects that really need that level of security. And that's part of the reason that it's carefully reviewed by the Citadel Steering Committee. We also have agreements with the Institutional Review Board so that they can set requirement that a project must go into Citadel to meet its requirements. But so what do we do to make it so that with all of these obstacles in the way, we're lowering those obstacles and making so the researchers can actually get things done? Once a project gets into Citadel, collaboration with researchers from other institutions is easy. We can create accounts for those for outside researchers. They can get a university net idea that's specifically for research computing users, and they can follow established processes to get trained and get up to speed, and then get on just as if they were a Princeton researcher. Even though Citadel requires an initial and annual training, we've made those trainings self-paced. They're videos online that researchers can get access to on their own terms. And we tried to make it so the training is just exactly what they need and uses their time effectively. With the introduction of the sub-admin role, we brought the control of the data much closer to the researchers. So they're not necessarily reaching out and waiting for someone from our group to do things. It's people that they have direct access to, or more direct access to, who can help to handle most of their things. That also makes it so that the high-level administrators can't get to their data. So it's helping to create that segregation. But so that's a place where we're able to put both convenience and controls into the same place. And because sub-admins are embedded into the research team, it makes adding and removing users much more easy, granting and exporting privileges. It just makes all those processes so much easier, because the sub-admin presumably has some understanding of the data and the data requirements at a much more intimate scale than we would kind of in a central office. So those are the things that we think that we've done to create the controls and the convenience for researchers to get their work done in a compliant way at Princeton for those restricted data sets. And with that, I think we can hand it over and open to questions from the audience.
Yeah, so there are some questions in the document. What type of third-party assessment did you execute was the first question.
We had 800, 171, 53, and HIPAA being evaluated by a company from Chicago, I believe. Sarah Bren was the company. Eric, do you remember where they're from?
I don't remember where they're from.
No,
Yeah.
well, they're sort of all over. I think they have headquarters in Maryland. But...
Maryland. Okay.
Second question, how many projects are currently being handled in Citadel, or what is the total annual dollars of research it represents, if you have some information like that?
We have 10 projects and over 60 users. I do not know the amount. Kurt, do you know the amount that may represent?
I don't know the amount. Elizabeth Adams is on the call, and if anyone from Princeton had that number, it would be Elizabeth probably, but she may not know the total research dollars associated with those projects.
So the third question is, how is the cost of Citadel handled? Is it centrally funded, or is there a cost sharing mechanism?
So that's something we're working on right now. The initial implementation of Citadel was fully funded centrally through a project that's actually associated with a funding model that's for administrative projects. Because of the compliance nature of this, it fell under kind of administrative. But that is good for the projects that are kind of the standard project that use a certain number of cores, a certain amount of memory, and a certain amount of disk space. But as we look at big projects that are coming in, those are going to be well above the margin, and they may have special requirements for hardware. They may significantly increase the amount of storage or computational facilities that we need. And for those projects, we're currently working on a funding model to see how the cost sharing actually would happen for those projects. All of the staffing around the projects is centrally funded, but as we look at those exceptionally large projects, we're going to try to figure out some way to have at least a shared cost model for funding the hardware associated with those.
Okay, so one of the next question is, I'm super interested in escrow group. Could you please expand a bit further regarding on how you choose the group members? Do you have separate members of escrow group for each project?
So we only have three escrow groups, and those were selected as people who are not directly associated with any research projects that are in Citadel. I'm one of the people, for example. I think Robert Knight is on the call. He's one of the people. I believe Elizabeth Adams also is one. She's our director of ORPA. And so there are some IT people, some purely administrative people across the university, and they were chosen really because they, first of all, have an interest in this area, and second of all, because they allow us to maintain that separation of duties, so they're not involved with the data on any of the projects.
Next question, is there a degradation in processing speed by having all the data encrypted?
So when they work on it, the data is not encrypted. It's only encrypted when they take it out.
Next, if you have 3 people to recover a lost key, are there personnel backups? What happens if one person is not available?
That's why we have 3 groups of 3, so that we always have a group that has a full cohort to be able to recover the key.
Yep. Is there any discussion about data loss prevention as something researchers do or don't want to do? Since it's a controlled environment, it'll be easier to detect exfiltration, but I don't know how much that is actually wanted.
Irene, do you
data-
want to talk about backups?
Yeah, so the data cannot be exfiltrated. It is controlled by subadmins. If somebody wants to export a subset of data, it needs to go through a person who physically will approve it or deny it. If we do a backup, the backup comes out from the system fully encrypted and would require keys that would have to bring the data back into rehydrated mode.
Okay. Where are the subadmins located and who are they? In the departments? Question.
They're part of the projects that are onboarded into Citadel. So once we create tenancy for a project, we ask who the subadmins are, and we have a minimum of 2 subadmins and a maximum of 3 that are required to be put on to the project. They are asked to complete an additional training in addition to regular user training. They have to complete subadmin training that teaches them how to onboard users, what their responsibilities are in terms of verifying the training compliance, and their responsibility for handling data.
Okay. There actually are a lot more questions, but we have a few more minutes, so I'm going to keep on asking. Is Citadel completely self-contained? Does it have its own DNS, KVM, or is there any of the Princeton infrastructure in scope?
It is completely self-contained.
Okay, next. How are project-specific security plans handled? Who does the work to create them and then reference the organizational SSP for Citadel?
I don't know that question. Do you know, Kurt?
I think that would be the research group's responsibility. Certainly, they're the ones that are signing any agreements. So we have not been directly involved in developing any project-specific security plans. We obviously have an SSP for the whole service, but we haven't been involved in any projects.
Yeah, so I can maybe add a little bit, like for instance, for controlled unclassified information, for export control, what we do at the University of Florida is we leverage the SSP of the enclave, but then anything that's in addition that is sort of lab specific or project specific is in what the export control management requires as the technical control program. And so basically that gets written out and what are additional details that are not covered, that are project specific. And then everybody who is a member of the project signs that. And that then makes the full SSP for the project. So let's see. How large is the team and how many man hours did it take to complete building Citadel?
So in addition to Irene, we had 3 sysadmins working on the project. And total number of man hours, I don't, Irene, do you know?
I don't have that, but I know we completed it from research to implementation in under a year.
Yeah, so that's a good, gives a good rough estimate. How do you allow for data ingress from existing projects while preventing egress?
We have these wonderful folks at Terra Insights. They have developed two ways of bringing in the data. There is a secured FTP as well as the inbox. Both allow the data to be pulled in from the university servers, and they cannot be pulled out. So one way.
Was the third-party assessment an independent opinion-based report or an independent certification issued?
Independent certification issued.
Okay, one more question. How involved is the technology team information security office in compliance efforts with Citadel?
Kurt, you want to take this one?
So certainly the ISO, the Information Security Office, is represented on the steering committee for Citadel and has been involved in developing the SSP and all along the way. So they've been intimately involved in the process. They don't have any operational responsibilities for Citadel, but they certainly are involved in kind of the governance and design of it.
Well, thank you. There are quite a number more questions, but maybe Irene and Kurt, if you can look at our shared document, you might have a chance to answer some of them in the document so people can see. And so then I want to thank both of you for an excellent presentation, and clearly it is one that had a lot of interest measured by the questions. I think this is the talk we had in our whole webinar series that generated the most questions ever. So if there was an award like that, which we institute as of today, you guys win it.
Is that the lack of clarity award, or?
No, actually you can see by the questions whether the questions are, hey, you talked about this, but